from the American Academy of Pediatrics.
Language is such a powerful part of who we are. For many families, raising kids who speak more than one language feels like a gift. For others, it can feel intimidating or out of reach. Today, we're talking all about multilingualism, when and how to start, how families can nurture it even if parents aren't bilingual themselves, what the real benefits are, and what common misconceptions make families give up too soon.
When you are talking about exposing kids to two different languages, if you want kids to be really fully bilingual, you want to make sure that they are exposed to rich language in the other language as well, right? So one thing that I worry about when parents are very well-meaning and trying to expose their child to a different language at home, if they themselves aren't fluent, is that then they're limiting their own ability to communicate with their baby.
Welcome to Healthy Children, the podcast for parents from the American Academy of Pediatrics. I'm Dr. Edith Bracho-Sanchez. I am a pediatrician and a mama figuring it out. This is a judgment-free space where all questions are good questions, and the answers will hopefully be even better. Let's get started. Today I have with me Dr. Mariana Glusman. She is a professor of pediatrics at Ann and Robert H. Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago, and she's going to help us unpack all about multilingualism. Mariana, welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Mariana, let's start with the big picture. What do we actually mean when we talk about multilingualism or bilingualism in children?
That is such a good question, right? Because everybody is on a different level in the bilingualism spectrum, right? Some people just know a few words in a different language, and some people are fully fluent in more than one language. So when we talk about multilingualism, typically we're talking about people that are able to speak or communicate well in more than one language. Bilingualism is two, but multilingualism is more than two.
Yeah. And there's often a lot of curiosity and sometimes I think anxiety around this topic, Mariana. Why are so many parents eager to raise multilingual kids right now? Tell us about some of the benefits to brain development and learning.
Yeah, I think that there's the obvious thing, which is you learn to, if you can speak more than one language, you can communicate with even more people in the world, right? And have access to so many other interesting things that you can learn if you travel or if you meet families or other people that speak multiple languages wherever you live. Obviously, also, there's the job prospects. The more languages you speak, the more you have good employment opportunities, right? But it's also really great for the brain because it expands your neurons, right? The more input that your brain hears, the more language or languages that your brain hears, the faster and stronger that it develops those language pathways. And so it actually helps in learning not just language and communication, but learning in general and your social-emotional development. There's a lot of science that really shows that kids that are able to speak more than one language can have more cognitive flexibility and even creativity.
Yeah, I was hoping that you would mention cognitive flexibility because I have to tell you, I feel like I'm seeing it in my own child. He's 4. We speak both English and Spanish at home. What do we mean when we say cognitive flexibility, Mariana?
Well, it basically means being able to take more than one perspective, right? And obviously, as adults, we are able to take more than one perspective, right? That's something that we grow up, we learn how to do. But little kids don't know how to do that very well, at least in the beginning. And we know that learning two languages actually helps you understand that, this person speaks Spanish and this person speaks English and this person doesn't speak Spanish. And so I need to change my behavior based on what I think the other person's doing. So just having that exercise in young children to be able to take other people's perspective is really excellent in helping develop that flexibility in bigger pictures as well.
Yeah. Oh, I love it so much. I'm such a fan of that flexibility and I see it all the time. I'll say something to my child in Spanish and he'll somehow know to turn around and talk to my husband in English, right? He knows what to expect from each parent and how to best communicate his needs. Now, Mariana, to get to the specifics, when can families start fostering multiple languages? Is there such a thing as too early or too late to start learning, teaching multiple languages?
So the answer is no, for neither. It's not too early and it's not too late. And really, it's very personal. And it has to do with your access to people that speak multiple languages, right? Children, even from birth, are able to hear words from multiple languages and actually be able to separate them and understand that they are different. So you can absolutely speak to a newborn or an infant in more than one language. And it's actually great because this is the time when their neurons, their brain cells, are developing super, super fast. So the earlier you start exposing kids to more than one language, the better. Now, that said, there are plenty of children that grow up hearing one language and then, for example, at home, and then they go to school and learn a different language, or perhaps they learn Spanish at home and then they go to school and they learn English, or they learn French at home and then English at school. And those kids are also perfectly capable of learning more than one language. And even adults are capable of learning more than one language, right? But the key is that the younger you learn, the easier it is, especially learning languages without an accent.
Yeah. So let me ask you about that because I'm asked about this all the time and I can't really explain it, right? So I learned English when I was about 14, 15. And there are times, if I'm really tired, haven't slept, to be honest with you, Mariana, that my accent does come out. But for the most part, I don't really have an accent and people can't understand. And everyone's always asking me, why don't you have an accent? What do we know about that? I think intuitively it makes sense. Of course, the earlier you learn, the more likely it is that you're not going to have an accent in the second language. But is there anything else that you're aware of that can explain why people have an accent versus not?
Yeah. I mean, there are individual differences. Some people just have a better ear, just like you might have people that have perfect pitch or be better musicians. And so they have a flexibility, a talent for language. That's one thing. But for the most part, we know that when kids learn a second language before puberty, they're more able to learn without an accent than after puberty. I also learned English when I was 11, so I was a little bit younger. And I have the same thing that when I'm a little tired, the accent comes out. Yeah. But for the most part, I can speak pretty well without people realizing that English is not my first language.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I am just fascinated by the brain and how it learns different things.
Yeah.
Now, Mariana, to get to what it might look like at home, right? So let's say babies and toddlers. What does early exposure to multiple languages actually look like day to day?
So first, I want to just back up a little bit and talk about exposure to language in general, because this is really important for baby's brain development. The more language you're exposed to, the better you learn. And the better you learn, the faster you learn. And so it actually is a positive cycle. So it's super important to expose children to the richness of the language. So when you are talking about exposing kids to two different languages, if you want kids to be really fully bilingual, you want to make sure that they are exposed to rich language in the other language as well, right? So one thing that I worry about when parents are very well-meaning and trying to expose their child to a different language at home, if they themselves aren't fluent, is that then they're limiting their own ability to communicate with their baby, right? I actually had this conversation with a mom one time. She said that she was learning French at the same time that her baby was learning French, right? And that's because she wanted her baby to be fluent in French because her husband's family is French speaking. And I was so excited that she was so committed to her son's ability to learn a different language, which is awesome. But my concern was, and I said to her, I said, well, how are you going to talk to them about making friends at school? I mean, your child is going to learn language so much faster than you. You're going to be behind and you're not going to be able to have those rich conversations. So if you really want your child to learn French, expose them to French speakers. And you, as an English speaker, speak English and love him and read to him and sing to him and expose him to really rich English language. And if you're learning French, speak French too. Why not? Show your child how exciting it is to be able to say words in multiple languages, but don't limit yourself by focusing on a language that you don't speak well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's such a good point about preserving the richness of language. And I have to tell you, I have had similar conversations with parents who, again, very well meaning, they themselves don't speak English. And in their worry that their child is going to enter school and not be able to communicate with others, they try to teach their kids English and speak English at home, but then they limit themselves in their ability to teach the richness of, in this case, it was Spanish, right? Because the community I care for is primarily Spanish speaking, but, they limit themselves in that ability to have richness in the language early on in life. So I think it's an important balance, and I'm so glad you brought up that point. What are some strategies that families can use to teach multiple languages at home? And I think you started to touch on, what if we only speak one language? We don't speak additional languages. What can we do? So I'm curious to hear your thoughts. And I also want to know, what if the parents speak different languages?
Yeah. So really, again, the key is exposure to rich language, right? And that comes from people that are completely fluent. So if you want to have your child, for example, in a preschool program that is an immersion program, there's plenty of preschool programs or even school programs that have exposure, immersion programs to other languages. Obviously, if you can afford to travel, that's wonderful as well. But that, of course, is not the case for a lot of families. But depending on where you live, for example, here in Chicago, where I am, there's a lot of communities that speak different languages. And so, becoming embedded in those communities is a really helpful way, right? Seeing other kids who want to play with you and you want to play with them, but they speak a different language, that's a huge motivator for kids to learn. So that's one thing. And then if parents speak two different languages, again, that's great. Right? As long as both of them are really enriching their child's brain, so pouring in all that knowledge into their baby's brain through that interaction, that back and forth, loving interaction, that's exactly the way to do it.
Yeah, amazing. Mariana, the other thing I wanted to ask you is, how important is consistency? Because, for example, right, in our home, my husband does not speak Spanish. I do. For the most part, we try for him to speak English and I speak Spanish to our child. But there are times, for example, we're sitting at the family dinner table and we're all trying to participate in the same conversation, so I speak English. So my son very astutely has caught on to the fact that I also speak English. So I'm wondering, in your experience, how much does it matter to be totally consistent and strict about one parent, one language? Or can we be more flexible and still be successful?
I love that you asked that question, because the old teaching used to be one parent, one language. You shouldn't mix, kids shouldn't be mixing languages within their sentences. Parents shouldn't be mixing languages because kids are going to get confused. And the fact is that you have to live your life as a family. You have to have meals together and communicate. And what you really want to show to your son is that you and your husband communicate with each other, right? And it doesn't make sense for you to speak a different language that he doesn't understand, because then you're not modeling communication, right? And so imagine if the expectation was that he speak to your husband in Spanish, right? If you speak to your husband in Spanish, that makes no sense. So I think that it is great that y'all communicating and focusing on that. I think that people oftentimes feel guilty if they mix languages and they think, oh my gosh, I just ruined my child's chances of being bilingual. But no, it is absolutely normal and common to mix, right? Even within the same sentence, you can mix.
Yeah.
We used to be so much more strict about you should never, ever mix your languages. But people have found out that kids actually who mix the languages are basically being really smart about language use. So I don't know if your son mixes languages, right? That sometimes he'll be talking and then insert a word in English when he's speaking in Spanish, right? And that's a really great strategy. It's like, oh, I don't know that word in Spanish, so I'm just going to say it in English. And so it is a strategy that many bilingual people use to increase communication. So it is perfectly adequate, normal, and actually, can even be encouraged if it means that you're exposing to more language. There's this really cool study Adriana Weisletter, who's a researcher here at Northwestern, did, where she listened to Spanish, English, bilingual parents and babies, toddlers really, sharing a book together. Right. So she basically videotaped them reading a book, reading a story, asking questions. And then she measured how much were they mixing languages, right? So did they only speak in one language or did the kids mix their languages? What she found was that the kids that mixed their languages, when they measured their ability to speak and understand, their vocabulary was even bigger, especially when they measured across both languages. So bottom line, you do not have to be strict about not mixing. Now, that said, the more consistent you are, as everything with children, consistency helps, right? Routines help. That helps kids learn. So if you can be consistent, that makes it easier, but don't worry about mixing.
Yeah, I love that so much. He does mix, and you're making me feel so much better about him mixing. But you're right. Like when you're saying it and I'm thinking about it, it is words that he doesn't know in English, right? Or things that he's only talked about in Spanish, that he'll be saying a sentence in English and then he substitutes it in. And it is hilarious. It is the cutest thing. I love it so much. I am noticing that he's starting to know the difference, right? Like he's starting to know, whoops, I just said that in Spanish. Or whoops, I just said that in English. As he gets a little bit older, he's having some awareness of it. But it is honestly the cutest thing, Mariana. I love it so much.
The other thing that's interesting is that when kids mix languages, they do it grammatically, right? So they might say, quiero milk. Right?
Yes.
But they don't say milk quiero, which would be not grammatical, right? So it's really interesting. It's fascinating how kids learn.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I will never forget. He was about somewhere between 1.5 years and 2, and we were flying to visit my sister who lives across the country in California. We're based in New York. And he was so tired in the airplane. And he just looks at me and he goes, Mama, do you think they have a kuna here? Do they have kuna here? Because he didn't know the word for crib, and he just wanted to know, do they have a crib on this airplane, right? But he didn't know the word for crib. Because we talked about, right, like sleeping happens for the most part at home, not at daycare, though some. But he just didn't really use that word in English. So he just subbed it in Spanish, and it was the cutest thing. I love it so much. Yeah. Now, along the same lines, how can families make sure that we're staying in the fun zone, in the learning zone, rather than learning another language becoming something that is stressful or forced?
Yeah. Nobody wants to be forced to do anything, right? Who likes that? I think that is so key, is that learning should be part of an enjoyable experience, right? You're going to the park, you're reading books and cuddling together, you're singing a song, you're playing a game. Children don't really learn well from flashcards. Right? And especially little ones. But even, we did our flashcards for medical school, right? But that wasn't fun at all. And it was really hard getting that knowledge in. Kids learn things so much more naturally when you're doing it in a playful and enjoyable and loving way.
Yeah, no, totally. And I'm glad you're bringing up flashcards because I wanted to ask you about technology, right? So we had a friend, very well-meaning friend, give us flashcards, electronic flashcards that you flip. The front is in English, the back is in Spanish. He'll do about 3, Mariana, and then he's done. He's like, this is really not that fun for me. So it is so boring to him. It's like no one's interacting or playing with me. What are you talking about? I'm not sitting here to do this. But what role does technology play? Like, is there a place for it? Have you seen it work in helping kids learn another language? What do we know?
Yeah, so for young kids, really the secret sauce is the interaction, right? And media, even the best, most interactive media doesn't hold a candle to the interaction that they have with people around them and the people who love them. So just learning from a video or from an app doesn't really work. One of my colleagues from Rhode Island, her name is Pam Hyde, she has this great saying, there's no app like your lap, right? Basically,
I love that.
Right? There's no app like your lap because kids are going to learn so much more from you and your cuddles and your interaction and that because they want to be with you. They want to be like you. Your voice is their most favorite sound in the world. So all those bells and whistles don't really add a lot. So there's really cool work out in Seattle. Pat Cool and her colleagues, they wanted to find out if kids learned from videos as well as they could learn from people. And so they had 2 groups of little babies, like 9-month-olds, and they brought them into their lab. And one group played with a research assistant who spoke only Mandarin Chinese with them. And then another group saw the same research assistant saying the same words, but in a video. And when they looked at the baby's ability to tell the difference between English and Chinese sounds, they found that the kids who saw and interacted with a person could do it, and the kids who heard the same exact words, but in a video, could not. They couldn't do it any better than a baby who had not heard any of it at all, right? So bottom line, the kids don't learn from apps. Now, one good thing I will say about technology is that we have this amazing ability now to connect with others in other parts of the world now, right?
Yes.
So if you have family in another country or people that you know of that speak different languages, go ahead and use that technology to interact with others. It's kind of the same recommendations that the American Academy of Pediatrics uses, right? For little kids, limit the use of technology, but sure, go ahead and use it for interaction, for communication, for connection with others beyond your family.
Yeah, I love that so much. It is a routine in our family. My son wakes up and has breakfast with his grandparents who live in Florida and speak Spanish. I know, it's the best. It's just the best. And he will speak Spanish to them even when he doesn't speak Spanish to me. So getting to my next point, I have to ask you about one common misconception and one common setback. Misconception that I hear a lot is that parents worry that learning multiple languages is going to confuse their child or delay their speech. I'm sure you have heard this as well. What do you say to parents?
The answer is no. Children do not get confused by learning multiple languages. Now, I will say that learning two languages takes longer than learning one language, right? So children learn language by listening. And if you're going to be exposed to more than one language, by definition, because there's only so many waking hours in the day, you're going to be exposed to fewer words in each language, right? So if you only look at the words, for example, in English, and if a child is exposed to English and French or English and German or whatever other language at the same time, and when you measure their vocabulary only in English, it'll seem like they have less words than a kid who only speaks English. But when you measure their vocabulary in English and their other language, they actually have the same or even more words, right? So no, bilingualism does not cause delay.
Yeah, I love that. And it's something that I really, really almost proactively talk to families about, right? Like definitely speak your native language at home and it will not, I almost have to say it in the same breath, right? It will not delay speech. It will not confuse them so that they don't, get discouraged by that.
Even children that have delays in language, right? Or perhaps have Down syndrome or autism. That's many of the families that I take care of. They worry that if they speak to them in their native language, that then that's going to be an issue for them. And so those are kids that are particularly at risk because, there aren't a lot of speech therapists or occupational therapists that speak multiple languages, right? And so parents think, oh my gosh, my child already has these disabilities or these differences. It's going to make it even more difficult if I speak to them in my language. But what happens is those are the children that extra need to be able to communicate with their families. So those are the ones that I particularly make sure to say exactly what you just said. Continue to speak in your native language because that's going to help your child develop to the best of their abilities.
Such a good point, Mariana. I'm so glad you bring that up because it really is going to make a difference for those kiddos. Mm-hmm. Now, the common setback I have to ask you about before we wrap up this episode, how do you recommend families handle it when one language starts to fade or a child resists using it? Classically, right, it's starting to happen in our household. We understand absolutely everything in Spanish, but we only want to speak English. How should we handle it?
Yeah, that's a tough one and a super, super, super common one that I hear all the time because kids want to be like their friends, right? One thing is at home before they go to school, and then they go to school and everybody's speaking English and, they want to be like everybody else just the same way that they want to wear the same clothes other kids wear. They want to eat the same, peer pressure starts early and it doesn't have to be a bad thing, right? Kids, of course, want to be social and they're seeing other kids behave in certain ways. And so they want to be the same when they come home. So the key is not giving up. I think that's where the point is. Not worrying. So if you speak to your son in Spanish and he responds to you in English, you can say, speak to me in Spanish, but you can't force him to, right? And if that becomes a barrier to your communication, well, that's not doing you a service in your connection with your child, right? Parenting, again, it's hard enough when you have to argue about putting on their shoes, let alone making sure that they respond to you in Spanish and put their shoes on, right? So I think that parents need to take off that extra pressure in forcing their child to speak Spanish or their native language, right? The key is, again, making it fun, right? So if you are going to a place where other people speak Spanish in your neighborhood, I love that he speaks to your parents, because you even said it. Yeah, he will speak to you in English, but he speaks to grandma and grandpa in Spanish.
Yep.
That is also great, right? Because he knows that he needs to be able to communicate. And I think that's one of the biggest things, right? Is teaching your child to be able to connect with other people, your family members who may not speak English. And again, just, same, also teaching your child to be able to speak a language because of all the benefits that we talked about in the beginning, right? But it shouldn't be at the expense of the communication that you have with your baby. So making it fun, continue to try, don't give up. He speaks to you in English, you keep speaking to him in Spanish, and then expose him to other things. Go together to a movie that's in Spanish, right? Don't put him in front of an app that speaks Spanish, but maybe making a big outing about, look, there's other things in the world, other people in the world that speak Spanish. That's going to help him understand why it's so important.
Yeah, make it cool, right? He's going to see it's a cool thing to speak another language. Mariana, you're making me feel so much better about my choices. We like to end every episode with what we call a parenting prescription. So when it comes to raising multilingual kids, what is one thing you want all parents to remember?
I think that the most important piece is love and connection. That's regardless of whatever language you're speaking in, right? And the more love and connection you can have in more languages, the better. So if you can expose your child within your home to multiple languages through that loving connection, interaction that you can have in everyday moments, that is ideal. And if you yourself aren't multilingual, that's okay too. Just make sure that they're getting that love and connection or interaction and fun in other places with other people who are multilingual, who are fluent in that language, so that they understand, wow, I want to learn that language too.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Mariana Glusman, for joining us today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure talking with you.
And thank you at home for joining us. If you like the Healthy Children podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app and help us spread the word. Follow Healthy Children on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Threads at Healthy Children AAP, and be sure to visit healthychildren.org, the parenting website of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Healthy Children is a production of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Our creative team includes
Laura Alessio,
Catherine Beard,
Garrett Brown,
Zach Christman,
Ann Johnsos, Kathy Jewell,
Claire Keating,
Doug Nagel,
Jackie Ortega,
Susan Stevens Martin,
Mary Claire Walsh,
Hannah Weston.
And our theme music was composed by Doug Nagel. We'll be back next week. I'm Dr. Edith Bracho-Sanchez. Thanks for listening.